Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not turning myself invisible, except my private parts, I'm here at Castle Wolfula reviewing movies. Universal Horror Month returns with my review of the Universal horror classic, The Invisible Man. Released in 1933 and directed by James Whale.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you?
In the years between his first horror movie, Frankenstein, and his final horror film, the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, director James Whale was doing everything he could to not have to make a sequel to Frankenstein at all, primarily by sabotaging the writing process of Bride of Frankenstein, but also by presenting Universal new material to adapt for horror films instead. The first taking form as The Old Dark House, released in 1932 and starring Boris Karloff, which I'll actually also be reviewing later in this video. Yeah, this is two videos in one. James Whale's other non-Frankenstein horror movie, an adaptation of the H.G. Wells novel The Invisible Man, was originally intended to also star Karloff in the lead role, but after a couple of years in development hell and a dispute over pay, Karloff eventually made himself invisible by leaving the production. The scripting issues surrounding Invisible Man ultimately came down to Universal wanting it to be more of a horror flick instead of sci-fi, insisting that the film integrate elements from a more violent, unrelated novel, The Murderer Invisible, and drafts of the Invisible Man script consequently featured wild and disparate elements such as invisible octopus monsters and a Russian mad scientist. But unlike Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley, the author of The Invisible Man, H.G. Wells, was still very much alive when Universal was trying to adapt his novel, and they needed Wells's approval before they could shoot the movie.
We ain't got none ready, not at this time of year.
Universal apparently didn't even own a copy of The Invisible Man, though. Their attempts at a film were just trying to take the basic premise of The Invisible Man in general and try to turn that into a movie using whatever insane ideas the studio thought audiences wanted to see. But eventually writer John Weld and final draft writer R.C. Sheriff went back to the original novel for their drafts of the Invisible Man screenplay, and the more faithful script was ultimately approved by H.G. Wells. The other problem of The Invisible Man still needed to be solved, though. Who would play the Invisible Man? Boris Karloff dropped out, so James Whale briefly considered his other Frankenstein star for the lead, Colin Clive.
We must work together.
Never.
But ultimately, Whale decided upon a casting choice entirely out of left field. Claude Rains would play the Invisible One, an actor that James Whale had become acquainted with during the director's theater days. Claude Rains had only appeared in one film before, a minor role in a 1920 British silent movie. Otherwise, Claude Rains was exclusively a stage actor up to this point who was struggling before he got the call to take up the bandaged-up mantle of Invisible Man. But Universal didn't want an unknown actor in the lead role. There was a, pun unintended, unseen brilliance to James Whale's casting choice of Claude Rains in the Invisible Man role, though. It creates this sense of intrigue surrounding the Invisible Man. You don't get to see who he is, what he looks like, until the final scene. All you have to go on is the voice of the character, his performance.
Come on. We've no time to waste.
And whoever could pull that off, no matter how unknown to the public they once were, would become a star instantly that audiences would want to be able to actually see instead of just hear in future films. So suffice to say, Claude Rains was perfect casting as the Invisible Man, and because you also don't actually see him for most of the movie, there's no association between Claude Rains' face and the Invisible Man character. Rains was able to avoid typecasting, unlike many of his Universal horror alums like Lugosi and Karloff. Claude Rains was actually able to go on to have a successful career outside of sci-fi and horror.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Regardless, though, Claude Rains will always be defined by the breakout performance that turned him into a star, The Invisible Man. Here's my review. But first, I have a message from my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus streams, and I thank you in advance.
I wanted to do something tremendous, to gain wealth and fame and honor.
Like Son of Kong, The Invisible Man is another film brought to you by the NRA. God, could you imagine an Invisible Man with an NRA membership? We'd never stand a chance. The film itself opens with a shadowy figure wrapped in bandages and clad in a dark trench coat walking through a snowy Sussex countryside, approaching a nearby colorful inn. Okay, I know this movie's in black and white. By colorful, I mean like the local color. It's here where the mysterious Dr. Jack Griffin makes himself known, and despite the crowd of patrons being instantly suspicious of Griffin and his intent, they kindly neglect to bring up his obviously fake nose. I mean, just look at that thing. It makes Chris Hemsworth's nose in Furiosa look real.
I want a room and a fire. I want a private sitting room, too.
Steady, sir.
Griffin is in need of a room and to be left alone, and the innkeeper's wife, played by Una O'Connor, reluctantly obliges the first request, but isn't so obliging of Griffin's second request when she consequently sees Griffin's face in a state of undress. But the weird thing is, she doesn't actually see Griffin's face.
I told you not to disturb me.
Griffin's one desire during his stay at the inn is to be left alone. But when you're so secretive and desiring of privacy, you ironically end up asking for the opposite, with everybody spreading rumors about you
If you ask me, he's a criminal flying from justice.
and butting into your business like Una O'Connor here, overreacting like some 2-bit YouTuber in a thumbnail. O'Connor went on to appear in Wales's next horror movie, Bride of Frankenstein. Whale was a huge admirer of her over-the-top performances. Nobody could wig out quite like her, and her performance in The Invisible Man is the first sign that it's not a totally serious movie. James Whale injected his work with a certain level of campiness and humor that livened his horror movies up compared to contemporaries.
Good old unit.
Adding comic relief to keep the subject matter from being completely grim.
I love dead, hate living.
You're wise in your generation.
But there isn't so much humor that the actual horror or tragedy ends up played for laughs, turned into a joke. It's a delicate balance that Whale manages to pull off exceptionally at the time.
A picture about death. I had to make it interesting for myself, you see. But the monster never receives any of my jibes. He's noble. Noble and misunderstood.
Griffin, though, exceptionally fails to pull off the experiment he spends weeks on while living at the Lion's Head Inn. And he ends up a week behind on his rent. And when you're making messes and seem to be running a meth lab, you end up asking for an eviction, horrible disfigurement or not. It's here, when he's confronted by a mob, that Griffin finally is able to reveal his true form, or lack thereof, as an invisible man.
There's a souvenir for you.
This scene, the most iconic striptease of all time, is also the most important scene in the film, and masterminded by effects pioneer John P. Fulton, it's one of the biggest milestones in special effects history. The scene had to sell to audiences that Griffin really genuinely is invisible. Shooting an invisible man by himself at the time was easy. It's as simple as shooting an empty room. What makes an invisible man a convincing effect is how he interacts with the visible world. And it took a variety of different applications of effects to just accomplish Griffin removing his wardrobe.
If he gets the rest of them clothes off, we'll never catch him in 1,000 years.
When Griffin unravels the bandages on his face, his head was really a head-shaped wire frame covered in bandages. Claude Rains was hiding below the fake head, mounted above him, removing the bandages from it with his real hands. When the bandages are fully removed and Griffin undresses is where things become much more technically innovative for the time. They shot Claude Rains by himself in front of a black background. Beneath Rains' wardrobe, he wore a layer of black velvet that could blend in with the black background as he removed his bandages and clothes. In post-production, the black background behind Rains and the black velvet he wore would then be matted out frame by frame, leaving only Claude Rains' visible wardrobe, which would then be combined with the shots featuring the cast in real sets. You can see faint black outlines around Griffin, what remained of the black velvet and backgrounds that once surrounded him. It was essentially the 1930s equivalent to a chroma key effect today, where you can shoot an actor in front of a green or blue screen, easily remove the background in post-production, and add or take away whatever you want. But this was 1933, so it had to be done manually and practically, without computers frame by frame. When Griffin's just his shirt and runs behind a real chair, for instance, you had to go frame by frame and manually mask out the parts of his shirt that would be behind the chair. The effect isn't flawless, of course. Logically, for instance, if a guy is invisible, you should be able to see the back of his shirt exposed by his collar's neckline, but that's easier said than done with the effects available at the time.
Jaffers, what do you think?
He's invisible. That's what's the matter with him.
After Griffin gets bored of the old shirt-chasing guy's routine, he becomes fully nude and fully invisible. And Griffin moving things around in this form, like bikes and brooms, is a little easier to explain. Thin wires rigged off screen. You can very faintly see them when he picks up this bottle. Simple but effective. The strings are hard to notice unless you're looking for them. It's the kind of ghost or invisibility gag you'd see in an amusement park. It's just pure fun to watch, even when babies are getting hurt. Griffin just does everything you'd ever want to do if you were invisible besides sneaking into women's locker rooms, because that would be wrong. The most challenging effects shot of the film was Griffin removing his bandages in front of a mirror. It involved combining 4 separate shots. A shot of Griffin in front of the mirror, a shot of the set the mirror was hung up on, a shot of Griffin's reflection in the mirror since he wasn't actually on the set to have a reflection in that mirror, and a shot of the set's reflection in the mirror. Part of the challenge involved with these effect shots was just keeping the 2 Griffins synced and the lighting consistent so the combined shot could look seamless to the untrained eye.
It is difficult at first to walk downstairs. We are so accustomed to watching our feet.
Another challenging shot in the film was figuring out how to make Griffin's footsteps in the snow. A large platform had wooden blocks shaped like feet built into it that could be pulled down beneath the platform. The platform was then blanketed with fake snow. When the foot-shaped blocks were pulled down, they would create holes in the snow shaped like footprints. You know, these look like shoe prints, not footprints. What are we supposed to believe? That Griffin invented invisible shoes? Boy, I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder.
These are trivial difficulties. We shall find ways of defeating everything.
The effects of The Invisible Man are impressive, especially for the time, and were essential to making the film work. But ultimately what makes The Invisible Man a classic is the story of Dr. Jack Griffin and Claude Rains' performance of the title character.
The power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
The opening scene set the tone of the film and established the Invisible Man as a character. But while all of this is going on, we get to know the people close to Griffin when he was just a humble chemist. Griffin's boss, Dr. Cranley.
He said we might not hear for a while.
Griffin's co-worker, Dr. Kemp.
I've got the car outside that'll give you a rest to come for a run.
And Griffin's love interest, Flora, the daughter of Dr. Cranley, played by Gloria Stewart, who you may recognize better, significantly aged as the 101-year-old Rose in Titanic, who we all know was really lying. Survived by floating on a doorframe, my ass.
Oh, leave me alone. How can you?
And Gloria Stewart's performance in The Invisible Man is about as good as her performance in Titanic.
You mean, did we do it?
But here is Flora. She just has to look pretty and give Griffin motivation and somebody to tell his evil plans to, like any other girlfriend.
The nation that wins my secret can sweep the world with invisible armies.
Griffin's pursuit of invisibility was initially just to earn wealth and fame to impress Flora.
I was so pitifully poor. I had nothing to offer you, Flora.
But he couldn't figure out a cure to reverse the invisibility and make it a little more practical. But turning invisible is a little like joining a prison gang. The only way out is death.
There's a way back, you fool.
Also, unbeknownst to Griffin, but notes to Dr. Cranley and Kemp, the invisibility serum Griffin created uses an obscure, banned drug called monocaine. Kind of like how Coca-Cola was made with cocaine.
Monocaine's a terrible drug. I never heard of it.
And just like Coca-Cola, monocaine comes with a mostly unknown side effect. It drives the user ragefully insane.
It alters you, changes you, makes you feel differently.
James Whale essentially wanted to inject some Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde into his take on Invisible Man, a good scientist driven mad by his own creation. Whereas in the book, Griffin is driven mad by just being invisible. The film version makes Griffin more of a sympathetic villain. Being evil is entirely out of his control, but he still has a good time carrying it out.
Power to make multitudes run, squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger.
Claude Rains as Jack Griffin could be the best performance out of all of Universal's monsters. He might not be quite as iconic as Karloff's Frankenstein or Lugosi's Dracula, but the appeal of Rains' Invisible One is in how cool he looks with goggles and bandages. Hugh Hefner is a mummy. But also, more importantly, the appeal of the characters and the performance that Claude Rains delivered as this maniacal lunatic with a laugh so so sinister, it inspired Mark Hamill's Joker laugh. But Raines still managed to display a softer, more vulnerable side that makes him human.
Why did you do this?
For you, Flora.
For me?
Yes, for you, my darling.
Griffin makes you understand how he became what he is, and Raines sells this performance through very limited means. His captivating voice.
Sit down, you fool, and let's have a decent fire.
And when he's clothed, his body language, every motion a precise, deliberate movement that communicates his state of mind. Raines dominates every scene he's in, even when he isn't physically present.
Sit down!
It's that commanding of a performance, and the fact that this performance can come through while he faced the challenge of wearing such a restrictive costume is even more impressive. Against Raines' wishes for audiences to see him perform for the first time, though, we don't get any scenes of Griffin before he turned invisible, but it works better this way. Lots of these early horror movies take a while to get to the main attraction, but here, when the film starts, we're already in the middle of the story. The Invisible Man is revealed to us just as much as he's revealed to the townspeople terrorized. It builds a mystery surrounding Griffin, makes him more intriguing than if we knew everything about him, and it makes the reveal of his face in the climax so much more rewarding than if we saw it earlier.
I shall go and prepare myself in my room.
As far as his evil plans are concerned, Griffin figures he needs an accomplice, a visible one, and forces his old friend Kemp to be his visible partner in crime, or suffer Griffin's invisible wrath.
A visible partner to help me in the little things.
Kemp seems at first like he'd logically be the clean-cut hero of the story, who tries to make Griffin good again, and Kemp would maybe be Flora's fallback guy when things don't pan out with Griffin.
Please, darling, let me tell you how I feel.
But no, Kemp is a coward who just does whatever Griffin wants out of threat of reprisals.
If you raise a finger against me, you're a dead man. I'm strong, and I'll strangle you.
And Kemp rats out Griffin to the cops just when Flora and her father try to appeal to his sense of reason. Don't worry, though, the cops handle this situation, surrounding the house by holding hands. It's not gay if you're trying to catch an invisible man.
Help! Help! He's got me by the feet!
This doesn't work, though, and as soon as possible, Griffin causes a train derailment that kills 100 people. Savage as fuck!
Here we go gathering nuts in May on a cold and frosty morning.
Whoops! The horror of the Invisible Man is very understated, but it's in the paranoia behind it.
I shall kill you even if you hide in the deepest cave of the earth.
The idea that a man could be invisible and kill you, rob you, humiliate you, cause random chaos, make you touch his invisible cock, you'd never know he was near until it was too late.
It appears that an unknown man by scientific means has made himself invisible and is now at large.
Griffin's a very unpredictable, anarchic figure, a huge influence on comic book supervillains in the years to come. An accident involving chemicals causes a reasonable man to do unreasonable things. But the Invisible Man has no superpowered foe to face him. All he has is really bad luck. As an Invisible Man, Griffin has to be naked with his visible cock and balls swinging around, but that nakedness proves his undoing in the dead of winter, when he tries to keep his cock and balls warm in a barn. But even an Invisible Man can't live rent-free, and the farmer whose land Griffin is squatting on tips off the police, and every cop in the county arrives to put a visible cap in Griffin's invisible ass. Because Griffin is invisible, ironically it means surgery can't be performed to save Griffin's life, and it's only when he spends his final moments with Flora that he realizes the wrong that he did. That his work didn't matter, being with her did.
I meddle in things, and man must leave alone.
The final shot of Griffin turning visible is the one effect in the movie I'm not entirely sure how they did. I couldn't find information about how they pulled it off completely, but I know some of what was involved, according to effects supervisor John P. Fulton. The shot was done entirely in camera as a time-lapse with no matting. The pillow was made out of plaster, and the blankets and sheets were papier-mâché, so the indentations would stay the same throughout the shot. When Griffin starts to become visible, a real skull was used, which then dissolves into shots of sculpted dummies of Claude Rains' head, before finally ending with a shot of Claude Rains himself. What eludes me is how they made this shot so perfect, placing the actor into and out of the bed while barely disturbing the bedding or the shirt Raines wears. But then I realized the answer might be in the previous shot of Griffin in bed. We see him breathing, which probably means the bed was hollowed out so stagehands or machinery could be placed under it. So to achieve the final time-lapse shot, there might have been a hole in the bed Claude Rains could fit his head through. The shirt and his body were fake in the shot. The hand might have been Rains's, somebody else's, or fake too. I don't really know for sure if this is true though, but that's what makes the effects at this age of Hollywood so awe-inspiring. It was really movie magic. They could accomplish the impossible. And like with a great magician who never shares their secrets, all you can do is guess how they did it. There are great effects today, but the answer to how they were done is most often just, we did it in a computer. Not as amazing. What is amazing to this day, though, is James Whale's Invisible Man. It turned its lead, Claude Rains, into a star overnight without ever seeing him act, and it's a technical feat with some of the most innovative effects of the time, but it's also just a really fun movie, showcasing Whale's wicked sense of humor and telling more story in its 70-minute runtime than some movies do in 2.5 hours. The Invisible Man might have made himself disappear, but his movie never will. I give The Invisible Man a young woman from The Invisible Man out of old woman from Titanic. When Claude rains, Claude pours.
I shall come back. I swear I shall come back.
But wait, there's more! I got a bonus review of The Old Dark House, directed by James Whale, starring Boris Karloff, and released in 1932, a year after Whale directed Frankenstein, and a year before he directed The Invisible Man.
I'm not easily frightened.
Aren't you? I am.
An adaptation of the novel Benighted by J.B. Priestley, The Old Dark House was James Whale's first attempt to placate Universal with another horror film, so he wouldn't have to direct a Frankenstein sequel, at least not right away. The Old Dark House is the least well-known of James Whale's 4 horror movies. It was the first real follow-up to Frankenstein for both Whale and star Boris Karloff, but it didn't take the world by storm like Frankenstein did. It was pulled from theaters 10 days into its scheduled 3 weeks of screenings. Most critics at the time liked it fine, but audiences didn't appreciate it, and The Old Dark House ended up falling into obscurity and was once thought to be a lost film after Universal lost the rights to it in the 50s. But a print of the movie was rediscovered in the late 60s by James Whale's friend and fellow queer filmmaker Curtis Harrington, and The Old Dark House has since been considered Whale's lost masterpiece. But it still isn't very well known within the Universal canon today because, well, it's not one of the monster films, the most beloved and easy to access, which is a shame because there are some real non-monster gems in the Universal horror canon. Admittedly, I haven't been helping things by only reviewing the monster Universal horror movies, but I'm reviewing Old Dark House now.
I love driving 100 miles through the dark, practically without headlights. This is one of the happiest moments of my life.
The film tells the story of a married couple, Philip and Margaret, the latter played by Gloria Stewart again, joined by their friend Roger on a less than idyllic drive through a miserable, stormy Welsh countryside.
Stop for the night. Stop for the night.
Mr. Penrose, please.
Sorry.
The trio becomes desperate for shelter and seeks it in the titular Old Dark House, but are given a less than warm reception within by the house's scarred, brutish, and mutish butler Morgan, played by Boris Karloff.
Even Welsh ought not sound like that.
This cold night isn't made any warmer by the family that owns the house, the Femmes, with future Bride of Frankenstein star Ernest Thesiger in the role of Horace Femme.
My sister was on the point of arranging these flowers.
A cowardly, paranoid non-believer.
The lake has burst its banks. We're trapped. We're trapped.
And Ava Moore as Horace's mostly deaf sister Rebecca, a mean, superstitious hag who resents the youth of Margaret.
But we'll rot too, in time.
Don't!
The two siblings act as contrast to each other, one harboring fears of our physical realm.
You don't seem to understand. We may be cut off. Shut up in this house.
The other reveling in and spreading fear of what lies beyond, a God's vengeful judgment.
You don't believe in God and yet you're afraid to die. You've seen his anger in the sky and you've heard him in the night.
A cold comfort on such a dark, stormy night.
What are you doing? We aren't all heathens.
Oh, I had forgotten my sister's strange tribal habits.
You're blaspheming.
Things become a little more comfortable, though, when 2 other lost souls arrive at the house seeking shelter. A chorus girl named Gladys and an aristocrat named Sir William Porterhouse. The latter played by Charles Laughton, director of Night of the Hunter and the husband of future Bride of Frankenstein, Elsa Lanchester.
I may not be this and I may not be that, but you don't catch me pretending to be what I'm not.
The five strangers try to make the most of their ruined evenings, but it turns into a fight for survival when they soon discover that they aren't just unwelcome by the Femme family. They're in grave danger from them. The Old Dark House was greatly influential to the campy musical Rocky Horror Picture Show, where a couple escapes from a storm only to find themselves at a party hosted by rich weirdos.
One of you guys know how to Madison?
But the Old Dark House also feels like a precursor to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's creepy, eccentric family targeting people looking for help within their home. There's even a creepy old man who isn't really a creepy old man, realized through makeup.
You see, when you're as old as I am, at any minute you may just die.
Influence can also be seen in House on Haunted Hill and its strangers trapped in a spooky house premise.
Why all these strangers? Why none of our friends?
Friends? Do we have any friends?
Essentially, though, The Old Dark House is a film about how a scary situation can cause people to act irrationally. In a drunken rage, Morgan attacks Margaret for no apparent reason. Karloff felt the role was a waste of his talents, having him play another character in the mold of the Frankenstein monster. But he's really good at this. He's an imposing figure with a terrifying intensity in his movement. Karloff brings a coldness to the character of Morgan, who only subtly hints at the excitement he feels carrying out mindless violence. On the other end of the irrational spectrum, though, Roger and Gladys, who just met an hour ago, are convinced that they're soulmates, and Roger even plans to propose to Gladys in the morning.
We're going to be married.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane, but it's the kind of thing you do when you're not sure if there's going to be a tomorrow.
Will you come to the wedding?
I think you're off your head.
The entire Femme family has lost their minds trapped up in this house for years, turning against each other over time out of bitter resentment. And they've locked up the most insane of their clan, Saul.
Saul is the worst, you know. He just wants to destroy.
And when he's unleashed, the rest of the family lock themselves away out of fear, never to be seen again until everything blows over in the denouement.
I will smite David even to the wall with it.
Benighted, the book The Old Dark House is based on, was intended to be a commentary on British society post-World War I. This feeling that Britain was this aging house in sharp decline and everyone was turning against each other.
This is an unlucky house.
The film works on that level as a social satire, but it also works through the dark sense of humor James Whale brings to the material.
I was merely telling your wondering guests that you were about to thank your gods for their bounty.
That'll do.
It's a very cold, creepy movie, but there's an odd warmth the characters brings that acts as a light shining in the darkness, a beacon of hope in a hopeless world. Things might look dire and fear-mongering might run rampant, but as long as people are willing to help each other, we'll persevere.
You all right, Margaret?
Yes, I'm all right, darling.
The Old Dark House isn't, to me, as strong as Wales's monster work. It's weak on plot, but it's still a really good, lost classic of the early era of talkie horror films with quirky characters, a foreboding atmosphere, and a chilling performance by Boris Karloff. For a movie about a house so dark and creepy, it's also surprisingly cozy. I give The Old Dark House a Boris Karloff out of a new Bright House.
Goodbye. So happy to have met you.
Click the subscribe and bell buttons for more Juniversal horror videos. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.